Progress.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Shalom Aleichem.
Lechem Shalom.
Bruchim Habam to the Kol Agur de Pirka, Monday, National Shir. Welcome, everyone. We have a very exciting shir for today, Be'ezras Hashem, B'siyata D'Shmaya. We also have very exciting news. Firstly, want to apprise everyone, please mark down your calendars. We're having our first ever Machon Magid Rakia Yarchei Kala, March 3rd to March 5th. That's taking place in Miami. Please join us for learning, for Shiurim, time to spend together. It will be a very interesting, exciting program, March 3rd to March 5th. At the end of February, February 17th to the 22nd, I believe, you can look on our site, we're planning a trip in the footsteps of the Chida, to Italy, to Livorno, to Pisa, to Ancona, to the Kvarim of many Gedolim, Achroinim, Mekubalim, the Zera Shimshon, the Abarbanel, the Ramami Pano, Rav Menachem, Rav Moshe Zakuto, the Ramad Vali, and many others. If you'd like to join us, you could look on our site for more information. If anybody wants to be mishtatef in upcoming Svarim, the next sefer in the queue is on Chinuch Habanim in Lashon HaKodesh, and as well as English sefer for Art Scroll on Lag BaOmer. We have an amazing topic this afternoon, a very exciting subject, a pasuk that perhaps we may overlook, but it's the most oft repeated pasuk in the entire Torah. And that is the pasuk of Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe Lemar. And God spoke to Moshe saying. This is the most oft repeated pasuk in the Chumash. It appears total 70 times. And there are a number of things we need to focus on. Number one, why does the pasuk change from Dibur to Amira? Vayidaber and Lemar. It starts off with Dibur and it concludes with Amira. Let it say Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe and a lashon of Dibur, or Vayomer Hashem el Moshe Lemar. And why the repetition? Just say Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe. God spoke to Moshe. What does Lemar mean? And probably many are thinking, and this is how the Radak interprets it. The Radak is found in the Sefer Hasharashim, Shoresh Amar. He says the word Lemar means to relay, to convey. Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe. God spoke to Moshe. Lemar, that Moshe should say it over to the Jewish people. So the word Lemar is a command. HaKadosh Baruch Hu spoke to Moshe, and he commanded him to say these things to Klal Yisrael. Accordingly, Moshe is being commanded to say these words to Paroi. So, for example, Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe Lemar, and Hashem spoke to Moshe to say to who? Typically, it would be to say to Yisrael, and in our parsha, it's referring to the Jewish people. Hashem spoke to Moshe to tell the Jewish people. The Ramban, however, is very unhappy with this explanation. The Ramban does not accept this explanation of Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe Lemar, that Lemar means to say over to the Jewish people. And the reason why the Ramban is not satisfied with that is for a number of reasons. Number one, very often after it says Lemar, it says Daber el Bnei Yisrael. So obviously Lemar does not mean to say to the Bnei Yisrael, because it already says Lemar. So what's Daber el Bnei Yisrael adding? Now, the Ramban asks many questions on this commentary of the Radak. First of all, we have a pasuk, Emesh, Amar Elai Lemar. Lavan says, yesterday God said to me saying. And God didn't want Lavan to say it over to anybody. So obviously Lemar does not mean to say over to anyone, because there God was not telling Lavan anything to relay or to convey. Furthermore, Lemar cannot mean to say over to others, so why would it repeat so often after the word Lemar, Daber el Bnei Yisrael? Or we have a pasuk, Vayoimru el kol adas b'nei Yisrael Lemar. Moshe said to all of Israel, saying, well, what do you mean saying? He doesn't need them to say to anyone. Or Bnei Yisrael said to Moshe, saying, Vayomru Bnei Yisrael el Moshe leimar. Or Moshe says, Va'oimar aleichem ba'es hahi leimar. I said to you at that time, saying. They weren't supposed to say to anyone, and there are many such examples of this. Therefore, the Ramban says the overwhelming preponderance of evidence leads us to believe that leimar does not mean in any way to say over to others. Again, either because it was not intended to be said to others, or because it already says after to say to others. Therefore, the Ramban offers a completely different interpretation in the word leimar. Namely, the Ramban says that the word leimar is teaching about, is what the word leimar is referring to is absolute clarity, definitive speech. Vayedaber Hashem el Moshe leimar. And God spoke to Moshe saying, and I interrupt myself I want to ask a question because the meaning of this pasuk is going to be very essential. Because whatever this pasuk means, we're going to have to try to explain. Whatever leimar means, we have to understand why would this be the most oft repeated pasuk in the Chumash. So even if we answer the questions, what's the difference between dibur and amira, and why say leimar if it already said vayedaber, another question we'll have to address is, why does the Torah repeat this pasuk so often? What is this pasuk conveying that the Torah keeps on repeating it? So Ramban understands the word leimar means definitive speech, without any hemming or hawing, without any uncertainty or unclarity or ambiguity. That's why when Lavan tells Yaakov, yesterday God said to me leimar, meaning absolutely clear. There are no two ways about it. Otherwise, maybe Lavan says, I would have tried to harm you. If God would have said, well, maybe do your best not to do anything negative to Yaakov, Lavan said, I would have surely harmed you. The reason I didn't harm you is because God told me absolutely. He told me leimar. Therefore, the Ramban says leimar is definitive. And accordingly, we can understand why this is such an important pasuk for the Torah to repeat, because leimar then is conveying the status of the prophecy of Moshe Rabbeinu. The Ramban says the reason why the Torah says leimar when God speaks to Moshe, and the reason why the Torah repeats it, is ki nevuas Moshe peh el peh yedaber boy v'loy b'chidais, because the prophecy to Moshe is mouth to mouth without any riddles. Meaning HaKadosh Baruch Hu is speaking to Moshe Rabbeinu in a clear and definitive manner. And now we understand why the Torah repeats this pasuk so often, in order to review and reiterate the fundamental principle that Moshe Rabbeinu's prophecy was on a completely different level than any other Navi, namely, it was ba'asba klaria ha'me'ira, absolute clarity. So according to the Ramban, Vayidaber Hashem al Moshe leimar is articulating one of the most fundamental principles of the Torah, namely, that Hashem communicates to Moshe without any ambiguity, without any uncertainty, with absolute clarity. We find that Rabbeinu Bechaye explains and offers a different interpretation of Vayidaber Hashem al Moshe leimar. He says, leimar refers to nistar. All of the Torah has nigla and nistar. The nigla is the pshat of the mitzvah. The nistar is the panemius of the mitzvah. That for the multitude, they can't necessarily attain and access it. Like David HaMelech says, Achas diber Elokim, shtayim zu shamati. The word, the dibur is echad. The dibur is echad, but it has two meanings. Like Shlomo says, tapuche zahav b'maskiyos kesef, golden apples in silver settings. The nigla is the silver, the inner is the gold. which is in the silver. That's the meaning of Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe Lemar. Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe, God spoke to Moshe the pshat of the mitzvah. Lemar, to reveal the secret of the mitzvah. So Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe Lemar is conveying, according to Rabbeinu Bechaye, seemingly another fundamental principle, that the Torah contains two aspects to it, the revealed and the hidden. And it would come out then that the reason why the Torah reiterates and repeats this so often is because fundamental to our connection to Torah is that there are two dimensions of Torah. But the Rabbeinu Bechaye goes on to explain the inyan of Dibur and Amira in a more Kabbalistic sense. He says, Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe is koyach hapnimi hanelam leimar al yidei shchina. V'zehu asher kasafti l'hoyroisam. Dibur is more pnimi than Amira. The Dibur, says Rabbeinu Bechaye, is the Torah shebechsav, and the Amira is the Torah shebal peh, as is known to the Chachmei Kabbalah. So even though this is beyond our pay grade, this is beyond our comprehension, but on a simple level, Rabbeinu Bechaye is understanding that Vayidaber is referring to Torah shebechsav, and Lemar is referring to Torah shebal peh. And that means the Torah is conveying that God gave to Moshe Rabbeinu two chelkei Torah, the chelek of the Torah shebechsav and the chelek of the Torah shebal peh. And accordingly, while we understand why the Torah reiterates so many times, Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe Lemar, Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe Lemar, because it is fundamental, again, to our connection to Torah, that there are two dimensions. There's Torah shebechsav and Torah shebal peh. Dibur, Torah shebechsav. Amira, Torah shebal peh. Well, based on this Rabbeinu Bechaye, the Baruch Tam offers a stunning explanation for the Pasuk in Tehillim, the Psukim in Tehillim Parakuf Yotes. Sarim ridafuni chinam umidvarcha pacha libi sasa noichi alim rasecha kemoitze shalorav. David HaMelech says, princes pursued me for nothing, and from your dibur my heart feared, but I rejoice over your word like someone who finds great treasures. Who are these officers and princes that pursued David HaMelech, and why was he so scared of the dibur and rejoiced over the amira? So the Sefer Peninim Yikarim brings to the Baruch Tam that of course these princes were Doeg, Hoadoimi, and others who challenged the lineage of David HaMelech. And they said, David, you're not worthy to come into the Kahal. You're Pasuk Lavei B'Kahal. Because the Pasuk says, Lo Yavai Amoni Umayavi B'Kal Hashem. And David, of course, came from Rus HaMayaviyah. And therefore David HaMelech says, Sarim Ridafuni Chinam, princes run after me for nothing. Umidavarcha Pachad Libi, and from your word, my heart is frightened. So the Dibur is referring to the Torah shebechsav. David was very scared of the Torah shebechsav, because the Torah shebechsav says, Lo Yavai Amoini Umayavi B'Kal Hashem. But says David, Sasa Noichi Alim Rasecha. The Torah shebal peh is Amira. Kemoitze Shalorav. We know the Torah shebal peh is Lo Yavai Amoini V'loi Amoinis, Lo Yavai Mayavi V'loi Mayavis. So David was scared of Umidvarcha Pachad Libi. But when it comes to the Amira of the Torah shebal peh, Sasa Noichi Alim Rasecha. Kemoitze Shalorav. So Doeg and Achitofel wanted to disqualify David, and that's why David was afraid of the Dibur of Hashem, and he rejoiced over the Amira of the Torah shebal peh. By the way, the Gra, likewise, in his commentary to Tehillim, he explains it in the same vein, and the Gra adds that Dibur is referring to Torah shebechsav. Why? Because we find in Torah shebechsav Vayidaber and Vayomer, but in the Torah shebal peh we only find Amira. Amar Abaye, Amar Reish Lakish, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Vayidaber we don't find in Torah shebal peh. So Torah shebechsav we find Vayidaber. In the Torah shebal peh we have Amaram Gamliel, V'chachamim Oimrim, and so on and so forth. Therefore, Amira is reflective of the Torah Shabbat Peh. Rava Amar Abaye. In the footnote, we bring an interesting question. There is, in fact, one Tana who often is referred to with the lashon of Dibor, and that's the Tana Rameir, Divrei Rameir, Divrei Rameir. One of the only Tanaim where we have Divrei Rameir, the Tanakama. And we suggest because perhaps Rameir's Torah, which was on such a sublime level, had a status in a way of Torah Shebachsav. Like the Gemara Megillah says that one time Rav Meir went to Asya and he wrote a Megillah Baal Peh. And the Gemara asks, how is he allowed to do that? Don't you have to write a Megillah from a pre-existing Megillah? To which the Gemara says, no, Rav Meir was different. To Rav Meir, the whole Torah was in his sort of mind's eye. The whole Torah Rav Meir was in his mind's eye. So so Rav Meir's Torah might have been bebechinas Torah shebachsav. Therefore, it says Divrei Rav Meir. Now let's explain this further. This idea that Torah shebachsav is Dibor, Torah Shabal Peh is Amira. Why is that? Why is Dibor associated with Torah shebachsav and Amira is associated with Torah Shabal Peh? We know that if somebody injures their friend, the Torah writes, Ayin tachas ayin, shein tachas shein, yad tachas yad, regel tachas regel, kiviyah. So literally the Torah says an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. That means according to the reading of the Psukim, the punishment for someone who knocks out the eye or the limb of his friend is we do the same to him, midah k'neged midah. However, the Chazal come along and they say, no, that's not the case. We don't blind his eye. We don't cut off his hand. It means money. So here it is. The written law is taking a very strict approach. The written law is saying eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. The oral law says, nah, just pay money. So in a way, the written law is strict, is midas hadin, dibor. The oral law is with mercy, is midas harachamim. Another example I would humbly add is the fact that the Torah writes that arba'im yakenu, you give someone 40 lashes, va'asura bananu batzurle, achas, the rabbis come along and they knock it down one. So again, the written law is dibur kasha. The oral law is amira raka. Here's another example of this, a beautiful example that Reb Schwab gives in the Sefer Iyon Tefillah. We say in the Halalukas, La'asois nekama bagoyim, toichechos bal'umim, lesar malchehem bezikim v'nechvadehem v'chavle barzel, la'asois bohem mishpat kasav. To execute against them written justice. Written justice. Mishpat kasav. Written justice. What's the emphasis on written justice? Just say Hashem should mete out punishment to the enemy. Says Reb Schwab, the emphasis of Mishpat Kasav is something that's written in the Chumash, in the Torah, is strict, without any flexibility, without any dispensation. It's Dibur, it's Mishpat Kasav, like the Pasuk says, Ayin Tachas Ayin, or like the Pasuk says, the Katsoy says Kappa, cut off her hand. Oh no, Chazal say no, it means pay money. So, you know what it's like, says Rav Schwab? Torah Shebachsav is a midas hadin. Torah Shabal Peh is midas harachamim. And just like with the creation of the world, God saw the world cannot exist with midas hadin, so He joined up with midas harachamim. So too, as if the world cannot exist with Torah Shebachsav, the Rebbeinu Shem joined up Torah Shabal Peh. And what we're asking Hashem to mete out against our enemy is la'asos bahem mishpat kasuv, to mete out written law, execute written law. So that's another example of mishpat kasav. So the Torah shebachsav is midas hadin. The Torah shebal peh is midas harachamim. Another example, the Rambam says in Hilchos Sefer Torah, if you wrote an extra yud where there shouldn't, or you didn't write a yud where there should be a yud, or you wrote a word which is a kri, and you wrote it kikriyasa, not kiksivasa. For example, you wrote yishkavena instead of yishgalena. You wrote techorim instead of apuvim. Or you wrote a Parshas Pchusa, Sesuma. In any of these cases, the Sefer Torah is pasul, and it does not have Kedusha Sefer Torah. That means when it comes to the Torah Shebechsav, if you deviate an iota, even a hair's breadth, the whole Sefer Torah is pasul, and it doesn't have Kedusha Sefer Torah. Why is that? But you still have the main message. You still get the gist. The main point is still being expressed. Why doesn't it have Kedusha Sefer Torah? Well, says Reb Schwab, when it comes to Kedusha Sefer Torah of the Torah Shebechsav, if you're missing even the thorn of the Yud, you can't make a bracha on it. Because when it comes to the written law, there's no flexibility, there's no acceptability, it's perfection or nothing. Because Torah Shebechsav is Midas Hadin. Masha Einkein, Torah Shebal Peh is Midas Harachamim. And therefore, you could have any language. You could have Torah Shebechsav in Torah Shebal Peh in Spanish, and in French, and in Swahili, and in any language you want. Moshe Rabbeinu himself translated the Torah. So therefore, and that's the reason why Torah is the responsibility of the loving father, and the Av Harachaman, because Torah Shebal Peh is Midas Harachamim. Says Reb Schwab, that's why in the Chumash, in the Gemara, God is referred to as Rachmana, the merciful one, because the Torah emanates from the Midas Harachamim of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In the Gemara, the perception of Hashem is Rachmana, the merciful one. So Torah Shebechsav is Midas Hadin, Torah Shebal Peh is Midas Harachamim. We bring here that this presentation is not so simple. There are sources to the opposite effect. That in fact Torah Shebechsav is Midas Harachamim and Torah Shebal Peh is Midas Hadin. For example, in the Tikkunei Zayar, Tikkun Yud Aleph, where the Zayar says Torah Shebechsav is given from the right hand and Torah Shebal Peh is given from the Midas HaGvura, from Midas Hadin. And only a Gibar could withstand the Torah Shebal Peh. Furthermore, there is another amazing source that Torah Shebechsav is Keneged Midas Harachamim and Torah Shebal Peh is Keneged Midas Hadin from the teachings of the Gra in the Kovetz Tzifunais, where on the Pasuk Shishim Hema Malachais, there are 60 Masechtais. The Rikanti brings that our tradition is there are 63 Masechtais. 11 for Zraim, 12 in Moyed, 7 in Nashim, 10 in Nazikin, 11 in Kachim, 12 in Tarais. The Smag says the simon is Libach Yihei Gasbahem. And if you consider Nazikin all one Masechta, it's 61. However, if you consider them separate Masechtas, and you consider the 30 Prakim of Kalim 3 Masechtas, is a total of 65 Masechtas, which the Gra then offers the following incredible remez. The Shem Havaya, which is 26, is Keneged Torah Shebechsav. The 24 books of the Torah Shebechsav, plus the 2 Luchais. 26 is Keneged the Torah Shebechsav. Shem Havaya is Keneged the Torah Shebechsav. Adnos Aleph Daled Nun Yud, which in a way is Midas Harachamim, 65 is the Keneged the 65 Masechtas, which is Torah Shebal Peh. So here we're seeing the opposite, that the Shem Havaya, which is Rachamim, is Keneged Torah Shebechsav, and Adnos, which is an element of Din, is Keneged the Torah Shebal Peh. But in our presentation today, we're going with many sources that we saw, that Dibur is Torah Shebechsav, Midas Hadin, Umidvarcha Pachad Libi, but Leimar is the Torah Shebal Peh, the Midas Harachamim. And now we understand why Vayidaber Hashem Moshe Leimar is the most oft repeated pasuk in Chumash. Because it's conveying the fundamental principle that every aspect of Torah has two chalakim to it. It has Torah shebechsav and it has Torah shebal peh. That's the basic tenet of our belief in the Torah. That there's bechsav and there's bal peh. Now after the war against Amalek, Hashem commands Moshe Rabbeinu to destroy Amalek, and Hashem says, Kisoiv zois zikaroin ba'sefer v'sim ba'oznei Yehoshua. Why does Moshe tell Yeshua to write this down? We don't find any other parsha that Moshe is commanded to write. So again, Reb Schwab says that since the destruction of Amalek is Midas Hadin, to execute Mishpat Kasuv, therefore Moshe Rabbeinu had to give it an element of Midas Hadin, of Torah Shebechsav. But likewise, the mitzvah of remembering Amalek has to be also Mitoich Haksav. Kisoiv Zoisikar Masefer, the Gemara in Megillah Darshans, that it has to be Dafka Mitoich Haksav. Why does this Zechira need to be Dafka Mitoich Haksav? We don't have to remember Shabbos Dafka Mitoich Haksav, or we don't have to remember Miriam Dafka Mitoich Haksav. So Reb Schwab says, because Mechias Amalek is the ultimate Midas Hadin, and therefore it has to emanate from an element of the Torah Shebechsav, which is Midas Hadin. In the winter of Tafshin Ayin Ches, I guess about 6 years ago, I had the zechus to visit Reb David Kohen, the Rosh Yeshiva of Chevron, and we were sitting at his table, and he shared the following beautiful idea, which fits in amazingly with what we just learned. Every Friday night in the Bracha Achas Mein Sheva, we say, Magei Navahis Bidvarai Mechayim Esim B'Ma'amarai. We say Hashem is the shield of the Avos with his Dibur, and he's Mechayim Esim Ba'amira. Why do we say by Magei Navahis Bidvarai and by Mechayim Esim B'Ma'amarai? And Rav David Kohen said as follows. He says the fact that Hashem is the Magain to the Avos, that says explicitly. It says, Achar Hadar Ma'ela, Diber Hashem el Avram b'machzah lemar, Al tira Avram, Anoichi Magain lach. So that's a Dibur, that's a Torah Shebechsav. But Mechayim Eisim, that's our tradition. That's not explicit in the Torah Shebechsav. That's more Dibur, the Torah Shebal Peh. So that the Nusach HaTfilah fits very well into the way that Rabbeinu Bechaya teaches. So we learned today 4 approaches to understand the Pasuk, Vayedaber Hashem al Moshe Lemar. Number 1, the Radak in the Sefer HaSharashim, Lemar means to say to others. The Ramban asks, there are many examples where it clearly does not mean to say to others. Hashem told Lavan, Emesh, Amar Hashem Elai Lemar, and Hashem didn't want Lavan to say it to anybody. The Ramban says Lemar means definitively, absolutely, without any confusion. And we explained that's why the Torah repeats this so often, because it's a fundamental tenet of our Amunah that Moshe Rabbeinu's prophecy was absolutely clear. Then you have a third pshat, Rabbeinu Bechaya. Rabbeinu Bechaya says Dibur is the Nigla and Amira is the Kabbalah, the secrets. And then ultimately Rabbeinu Bechaya says Vayidaber is Torah Shebechsav and Lemar is Torah Shebal Peh. And it fits very well into the Psukim in Tehillim. Sarim ridafuni chinam umidvarcha pachad libi sasa anoichi alim rasecha kamaitze shalarav. And the Torah Shebechsav is Mishpat Kasuv, is Midas Hadin. But the Torah Shebal Peh is Rachmana, is Amira, Amar Abaye. And that's why we explained it's Magain Avos Bidvarai, but Mechayim Esim B'Mamarai. Okay, Rabbi Say, that's some insight into the most oft repeated pasuk in the Chumash, Vayedaber Hashem al Moshe Lemar. I wish everyone a great day. Kol tov, everyone. Thanks for listening. Kol tov. Thank you.